Hey everybody, thank you so much for being patient with me uploading this video. I know it's been a while since I have uploaded, but as you can clearly see behind me, I've been moving and I finally got all my stuff set up, and there's my buddy Kermit right there. So thank you again. I know it's been a while since this last video. I wanted to put something out this weekend just for you guys to take in over the weekend, just to have something fun to watch, something we can hang out with, you know. So without any further ado, here is the top 10 queues at Disneyland. Again, thank you. Now, of course, we all know Disney is known the world over for their world-class attractions. Starting with the reason Disneyland was all built, the railroad around the perimeter of the park, and going all the way to the modern day with Rise of the Resistance and the very immersive queue they offer. And speaking of queues, I wanted to talk about the best ways to wait in line at the Disney parks. We're going to be talking about the most immersive and best themed queues at Disneyland today. Now, I know waiting in line isn't exactly what we all want to be doing at Disneyland, but these immersive lines make waiting a little more bearable. So from the Indiana Jones adventure to Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, here are the 10 best queues at Disneyland. Coming in at number 10, we have Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Now, if you know me, you know I love this attraction. It's one of the most interactive Fantasyland dark rides I've ever been on. It's like the world's first 4D ride. And the queue, for that matter, is very quaintly themed. You wind through the gardens in the back of Toad Hall, looking at statues and busts of the characters that you will soon meet in the ride. And when you enter Toad Hall itself, you're treated to a wonderfully decorated and lavish London cottage? Mansion? Hall. It's Toad Hall. With a wonderful, somewhat wooden statue of Mr. Toad, whose nose is usually scuffed up pretty bad due to guests running their hands over it over and over again for days and days and days and years on end. And my favorite little detail in this line is the tiny stained glass toad sitting on top of the operator's booth, right next to where you board your cab. I couldn't tell you why, I just think he's really cool. So the line's ability to transport you to turn-of-the-century London with all the theming to make you feel like you're in a fancy London hall. And all of these reasons are why Mr. Toad's Wild Ride is number 10 on our list. At number 9, we move right across the street in Fantasyland to yet another dark ride, this time Snow White's Scary Adventures. Now this line, similar to Peter Pan or Pinocchio, has very little theming on the outside, minus a few chain link switchbacks and of course the famous Apple Easter egg, but once you get towards the inside where you board your log minecart, yeah. You pass by a wonderful little tiny set of the Wicked Witch's dungeon, accompanied by the sound of thunder outside and the evil queen in her hag form laughing hysterically as you walk past. I don't know what's so funny. Maybe she's happy about the fact that she's going to be extremely rich after she cashes in all the coins that people like to throw into that scene. For real though, there are so many coins in this scene all the time. Another little thing that I enjoy about this queue that also applies to all the other Fantasyland dark rides is the safety spiel at the beginning. In Pinocchio's Daring Journey, it's Jiminy Cricket who gives you the safety spiel. In Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, it's Alice herself. And in Snow White's Scary Adventures, it's the evil queen, again, as a hag. Just a little foreboding safety spiel they can throw in front of you at the beginning of the ride to prepare you for the scariest ride at any Disney park ever, of all time. It's not even debatable, it's that scary. Number 8 brings us to the far reaches of outer space with Tomorrowland's signature e-ticket attraction, Space Mountain. Now the queue inside the show building is dated, I'll give you that. It feels like you're walking through an 80s sci-fi movie, which I personally think is part of the charm, but I can see why some people don't like it. What we're focusing on though is what I like to call the Astraeus Project room. If you're familiar with the location of the Starcade in Tomorrowland, this occupies the second story of that same building. The room is dedicated to the aforementioned Astraeus Project. The big machine you see in this room is the Astraeus Deep Space Telescope, and the images you see on the wall are pictures taken from that same telescope that is now on display at Space Station 77, where the ride takes place. And that weird giant spaceship in the loading bay also, I think, does a lot to help build the story. You're not quite sure what it's there for, but it adds to the intrigue of the ride. So the mixing of science fiction with the Space Mountain show building proper and science fact with the Astraeus Project makes this one of my favorite lines in the parks. And of course, like I said, the little Easter egg to Space Station 77, alluding to a bigger, overarching story for all the Space Mountains all over the world, but we've been there before. When Galaxy's Edge opened last year, they opened with only one attraction, Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run, and this was a very good opening day attraction for the land, I have to say. It's a very fun, interactive alternative to Star Tours, one that I prefer more. And if you consider Star Tours an E-ticket, then Smuggler's Run is very easily an F-ticket, at least to me. Sure, it's no Rise of the Resistance, but this ride I think is very fun, and the interactive element makes every single ride different, for better or for worse. And the line, once you enter Onaka Transport Solutions, the building, it gets very interesting. You look and you can see the abandoned workplaces of a few workers. You can see that some were playing sabacc on a table while others were opening the shipment of Katsaka popcorn. Seriously, there's a massive crate of Katsaka kettle popcorn sitting just in the middle of the queue. Small details like an astromech droid being used as a trash can, two bigger ones like the ship that tests its engines every now and then as you move through the building. And of course you get to hear the lovable yet sometimes annoying banter of Malta and Gar as they attempt to do their jobs. This coupled with the awesome pre-show featuring the wonderful Hondo animatronic, and of course who could forget the second best R5 unit on Batuu. I mean, look at him, he's got a little angry shark mouth, isn't he the greatest? And for all of these reasons, Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run finds itself at number 7 on our list. Number 6 on our list takes us back to Mickey's Toontown, and not quite to Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. Not yet, at least. Here we can find one of the most popular attractions at Disneyland in the mid-90s, Roger Rabbit's Cartoon Spin. In all seriousness though, this ride is very fun. You can spin around and make your partner sick, and in my opinion, the attraction starts when you enter the queue rather than boarding your cab. You see, this line is heavily themed towards the back alleys and seedy streets of Toontown, and there are even a few elements of this line that you can interact with while you wait. You enter through the Toontown Cab Company and then wind your way back through the darkened Toontown streets, and then you pass through the Ink and Paint Club's backstage areas. Here you can see a number of props from around Toontown and the ride, and most importantly, Jessica Rabbit's dressing room. After this, you pass through the Dip Refinery, where you pass by a bubbling tank of the stuff before you exit back out into the Toontown Cab Company and board the actual ride proper. And I just think the feeling that this ride gives you of being outside in a sort of dangerous part of town while being completely safe and inside really helps build the anticipation for when you finally board your Benny the Cab. But who knows, maybe when Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway opens later this year, Roger Rabbit's Cartoon Spin will have a bit of competition. Wait a second, it opens in 2022? 2 years from now? Well, everyone, I'm going into hibernation until Runaway Railway opens in 2 years. Wake me up when it's open, but until then, I'll see you guys all later, and I'm not making any more videos until then. Number 5. Everyone, you knew we'd have to end up here eventually. You know me, and you know I love talking about this ride, so let's just go ahead and get this out of the way. Since its opening in 1969, the Haunted Mansion has been chilling and entertaining guests of all ages for over 50 years. And it seems to be a real debate among Disney fans as to where the actual ride begins. In my opinion, it begins when you enter the stretching room, but some people think it begins when you board your Doom Buggy. Whatever you think, we can all acknowledge that the queue for this ride is spectacular. You reach the outskirts of New Orleans Square and stumble upon an abandoned old manor. You can still faintly hear the jazz music behind you as you enter the line. At first everything is okay while you wander through the beautifully manicured lawns, but then you pass in front of a hearse with an invisible ghost horse leading it. A detail that helps build the feeling of being somewhere that's a little spooky. Then you wind past the pet cemetery featuring some funny jokes about some pets who have long since passed. Then you pass in front of a crypt featuring, again, some pretty funny puns. And before you know it, you're on the porch of the Haunted Mansion itself, and you're about to enter the main building, the foyer. A glass chandelier hangs above you, the room is dark, and the mirror is all dusty. And you hear the voice of Paul Frees beckon you for the first time. I mean, the ghost host. You then enter the stretching room, which, again, I consider to be the start of the actual ride. Up next is probably my favorite part of the attraction, the hallway of changing portraits. And something I like to do here is just linger as long as the cast members will allow me, just watching the portraits change, noticing all the details, looking at the busts on the wall, especially late at night when there's not as many people going on the ride and you more or less get the entire room to yourself. It can get a little unnerving in there sometimes. And you'll notice what puts the Haunted Mansion at number 5 for me is what applies to the other entries on our list. The ones coming up next is you can't really begin to tell where the queue ends and the ride begins. Or at least it's debatable, and that's my favorite kind of queue, when it blurs the lines between ride and line. Okay, I have now officially said queue and line more times in this video than I should. Let me take a look at some other synonyms that I can use instead. Yeah, okay, these are all terrible. I'm just gonna keep going with what I've been saying. Here we go, yet another ride where you can't really tell where the queue ends and the ride begins, and that's Disneyland's newest ride and, Walt Disney World's, newest ride, I would say, Rise of the Resistance. It's seriously one of the most technologically advanced and impressive rides I have ever been on, even though I still do like the Haunted Mansion more. Now, there is a proper line for the ride that you have to wind through, but I think there's lots of set dressing and things to look at to keep you entertained, and they've even built natural benches into the rock work. That way you don't have to stand for 3 hours while you wait for the best ride Disney has ever made. Second best ride, okay? Alright, third best ride Disney has ever made. And while the line winding through the caves has a lot to look at and a lot of small Easter eggs, the real fun begins when you enter the briefing chamber. Now, if you haven't been on Rise of the Resistance and you want to avoid spoilers, don't click away. I'm not going to go into detail about anything. I'm just going to stress how immersive this line is, and you really cannot tell when the actual ride begins. I keep saying that a lot, but it's true. So if you're in line for Rise of the Resistance and there's nobody behind you, I would say linger a little bit in the briefing room and rooms afterwards that I'm not going to mention, because it is seriously some of the best work Disney has ever done, but it's not number 1 on our list. In fact, it's not even number 3 or number 2. But with that said, let's move ahead to number 3 and figure out what it is. This ride's queue is so story-rich that it extends beyond the limits of Disneyland and into all the other Disney parks around the world. The Jungle Cruise's queue in Adventureland is heavily themed and tells the story of the Jungle Navigation Company. You find tidbits and references to Dr. Albert Falls, the founder of the company, and of course, as we all know him here on the Offhand Disney Channel, a member of the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, but we'll talk about that in a future video. Besides the storytelling in the queue, there are also real pictures from around the time period and lots of wonderful props to look at, including my favorite, the jade elephant on the 2nd floor. The music that plays and the specimens on display that rhymed, and the pretty hilarious Jungle Navigation Company announcements that are made over the intercom.
Also in the news, an entire Jungle Cruise tour group has disappeared in the riverfront region. Authorities are trying to determine their exact whereabouts. It is the 4th reported incident involving the Jungle Cruise this month.
They all set the tone for the ride that you're about to experience, and the fact that it's an original Disney ride I think boosts it up even higher. You even get to pass underneath an audio animatronic great hornbill. I honestly did not know the name of that bird until I just looked it up, but the more you know. And it is for all of these reasons that the Jungle Cruise finds itself at number 3 on the list. But what about number 2? Go ahead, take a random guess. I'm pretty sure you guys know what it's going to be. Also in New Orleans Square, you can find another classic Disney dark ride, Pirates of the Caribbean. You enter underneath a bridge covered in vines into the courtyard of the Cabildo building, or at least a building that's way smaller and just looks a lot like it. It's where the Louisiana Purchase was signed in 1803, the one in New Orleans, not the one in Anaheim. I chose this as number 2 because it's sort of a mix of the classic Disneyland queue and also the super interactive immersive ones. You start out outside in a pretty well-themed queue, but it's not really telling a story until you get inside, and then you enter Lafitte's Landing. Yes, Lafitte's Landing. You can see the map of the island you're about to explore, the parrot giving you secrets and details about the ride, similar to me. I don't know how to explain it really. It's quaint while at the same time being super immersive, if that makes sense. It's not like Rise of the Resistance where you have to have a high-tech themed queue. The Pirate's Line is as nonchalant as it can possibly be, but there's also tons of things to look at if you're looking in the right places, like the pineapples on the doorstep, which were a sign of hospitality in the American colonies in the earlier days of the US. You know, before America even owned Louisiana. We've talked about classic queues, we've talked about high-tech newer queues, but what is number 1? What is the culmination of the past 9 entries on this list? And that honor, the honor of being number 1 on the top 10 queues at Disneyland list, is the Indiana Jones Adventure in Adventureland. Even the outdoor queue has things to look at and props to find. The truck from the very first Indiana Jones movie, the Dominguez palm tree, the snake statues welcoming you into the ride, the little man of Disneyland's house. These are all details that the average person probably won't see, but nevertheless they add to the immersion. But the real fun begins when you enter the Temple of the Forbidden Eye. The rockwork, sculpting, and artistry of the Imagineers is on full display in this line. line. You wind through caves full of bat guano and then eventually into a bunch of different death traps designed to kill intruders to the temple. A few of those past intruders you can find laying on the floor and impaled on a couple of spikes. But my favorite part of this line is after the collapsing hallway when you enter the massive room. I don't know if there's an official name for it, so that's what I'm going to call it for now. Wait, never mind. According to Wikipedia, it's called the Rotunda Calendar. Interesting. Here you can spot a giant portrait of Mara on the ceiling, and you can pull on a rope to hinder the man digging in the well below. And not to mention you can decode the mysterious lost language on the wall if you have a decoder card, which luckily they began giving out recently again. Apparently it's the first time since like the 90s that they've done this. You just have to ask a cast member. I've got mine. And yes, of course, like I've said for all the other entries, the line prepares you for the experience you're about to have. It's grandiose, it's expensive looking, it's mysterious, expensive looking, but most of all it inspires a feeling of adventure, which is what the ride at the end of the day is all about, and that is why it comes in at number 1 on our list. Well, my list at least. What is your list though, I want to know. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think is the best queue you can find at Disneyland? And if you guys enjoyed this video and you didn't get tired of me saying queue and line 600 times, maybe I'll make another one about Walt Disney World. Or we could go by park, yeah, I don't know, we'll see. I'm getting ahead of myself. Queues have always served as an introduction to the ride that you're about to experience. And I think with this list we've covered the 10 best experiences at Disneyland to have while you're in line. Not just sitting in a boat or in a doom buggy. And just so you guys know, coming up next is top 10 churro flavors. Stay tuned.